Good. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate it to this wonderful episode. I am Jeff Wellstead. I have been in human resources, global human resources now, believe it or not, for 35 years. I know you can't tell from my incredibly youthful appearance. But yeah, I have worked with big multinational organizations at headquarters for about 17, 18 years back in and around New York City, and then came over to the UK about just 21 years ago and started working with a whole bunch of as many as 16 or 17 different tech and biotech startup and scale up organizations with a couple of FTSE 100 companies sprinkled in there, all around basically developing HR from scratch. As a result of that, obviously became incredibly focused on HR technology as a way to automate and augment and democratize information and basically make our jobs in HR a bit easier by sharing the load. Um, that that obsession of mine then kind of grew into a full-blown obsession when, about 4 or 5 years ago, the advent of AI and its implications started to kind of very gently, very secretly start to unfold in areas like certain HR technologies. Notion, as an example, had a very early stage AI tool, and then it all started to balloon after that. So it really then, with the advent of large language models, which we'll talk about in a minute, it really kind of just exploded. And the use case for the use of AI and large language models in the HR context is absolutely super compelling. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I also want to say this too, is that I have a lot of love and a lot of respect for my fellow HR folks. I know how hard this job is, and it is not always fun. Um, and it's frustrating, I think, especially when you take a look at the fact that we kind of oftentimes think that we're joining HR because we're going to have a much more strategic and kind of human-centric experience and really bring something fresh and new to the HR equation, to our companies overall. We're going to really drive culture. And instead, what we end up having to do more often than not is get buried in an avalanche of administration and compliance and governance and policy enforcement and things of that nature. And it's just not really what we signed up to do. And that's what I want to talk about here too, because it's really kind of my mission going forward. This will be my legacy that I want to leave behind from an HR career perspective. I want us to change the game. I want to kind of take us to a different level, a much more strategically relevant level. And that's what I think AI can really help us do. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to give you a bit of background just about AI, what the heck it is, what large language models are about, difference between chatbots and AI agents, and then importantly, as context for that, to say this is now what it can kind of go and help us do. So really happy that you guys are here. You guys were all here by invite only. This was not a bulk LinkedIn reach out. And so I'm really truly honored that you all decided to join, and it's great to have you on board. Um, right. So let's start talking a little bit about this notion. I'm going to stretch the metaphor, the super worker metaphor, a little bit, only because that's kind of what Josh Bersin coined basically when he was talking about the power of AI in the HR function. So let's start by kind of imagining our best performing team member, right? And imagine that same person with the strategic foresight, like of our chief of staff, and the analytical rigor of a data scientist and the execution speed of a sprint team all in one. That's kind of what AI basically can bring to the human equation from a co-pilot perspective or a super worker perspective, if we obviously apply ourselves to it. So Josh Bersin kind of defines a super worker as an individual who leverages the power of AI to dramatically increase their productivity, performance, innovation, and output, right? And it's not just about working harder, of course, it's about working smarter and faster and much more creatively with AI as your kind of trusted co-pilot. I don't necessarily know what all of your individual experiences are with this stuff. And I'm sure that a lot of you have played around with large language models. But I think the struggle then we have is bring this in-house, and what kind of use cases can we engage with it? So we need to kind of this notion about moving past AI to optimize existing structures and systems isn't really sort of the journey that we're probably meant to be going on. I think what's going to be exciting about this potential journey, this notion of an AI transformation, is that it's going to force us to rethink pretty much everything. It's going to force us to rethink how jobs are structured, how our organizations are designed, what the flow of work is, because I think we've just kind of developed and evolved things in a way that links back to all sorts of different dysfunctions and difficulties, workarounds, escalations. And what we want to do instead is kind of create optimized versions of this that AI can really kind of come in and help us power. Okay. And so what is AI? Just very quickly. I think that a good way to think about artificial intelligence is our technological superpower. It doesn't replace us, but it definitely enhances us, right? And it extends our reach and our speed and our decision making in ways that kind of go way beyond our human limitations. It's kind of in a way like a superhero gets an edge with gadgets and superpowers and sidekicks and things of that nature. And AI in this instance is sort of the combination of the gadgets, the powers, and the sidekicks all in one, which is kind of cool. Um, the sidekick, fortunately never sleeps, never needs a coffee break. Right? It is continuously learning, and it's fast and it's tireless and it's data savvy and it's always ever on, right? So the idea is it's there to kind of help us make sense of a very complex world, and that's really kind of what matters. But under the bonnet, like AI has a couple of core components that I think are useful just to kind of understand. You have, first of all, first and foremost, machine learning, right? And machine learning is really the big tool, the memory bank that basically helps you kind of derive deep patterns and trends and things of this nature. Excuse me. And that is really sort of the engine that starts to piece everything together and start to make sense of these complex patterns. But it's supported by deep learning, which is a very intuitive, almost kind of like a neural net, very similar and designed after the way the human brain works, which is really quite fascinating. It is not as good at the moment as our human brains, but it does help in recognizing, patterns and faces and voices and trends and things of that nature in ways that we would really struggle. And it continues to teach itself as it fails and tries different avenues and things of that nature. So it's really quite fascinating. And then there's natural language processing, which a number of us are all used to, which is this interface, this really kind of comfortable interface whereby we are able to communicate with the computer. And it allows us to, all of us, anybody, not necessarily developers or programmers or people with computer science degrees, to basically give complex computers instructions of exactly what we want. There are smart ways to do that, and there are very ineffective ways of doing that. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute too. And then, of course, there's computer vision, which is sort of like all these incredible visual video tools and image generators and things of that nature that really kind of give the computers, in essence, the power of sight and imagination, which is really quite amazing. Um, and then we have these things called transformers. These are the scary bits, okay? And when I say scary, they're scary, amazing in terms of what they do. The worry that some people like Jeffrey Hinton, who's the supposed godfather at Google of AI, the worry that he and some others have is that we don't really know what happens inside the transformer in terms of the way information is shuttled back and forth and processed. It's a bit of a black box, even to the people who built it. Which is kind of like what makes them nervous because they see the incredible things and the advances and the speed and the intelligence coming out of these tools. And sometimes they wonder, like, how did that even happen? Like, how did it piece that together so quickly? So, but that is really kind of the thing that makes AI more than just simply a predictive model, which is what large language models were built to do initially. So what does it do for us? All of this stuff, right? It enhances our decision making. It gives us smarter data-backed, insights, right? It automates routine tasks so we can focus on things like strategy and not necessarily pure admin or compliance or policy enforcement. Um, it can help us predict trends. It can take a look at data sets, recent data sets, and compare those to prior data sets from earlier times and things of that nature, and make predictive estimates that certain things might happen. And that gets exciting when you're doing things like scenario planning. And they can help, really importantly, they can help personalize experiences and really kind of make the mundane, painful tasks of trying to kind of like do administrative stuff at work super easy. And in fact, can make it feel seamless, literally from your recruitment process, your offer process, your onboarding process, your team integration process, all of these things can be made to feel quite seamless. And we'll talk a little bit about the tools that you can kind of deploy on that. So these are all the things that I think are super powerful around this. Let's just talk very quickly about large language models, okay? And that's the stuff that we're used to dealing with. This is what OpenAI has created with ChatGPT, what Anthropic has created with Claude Sonnet in particular is the one I like using, what Google has created with Gemini, and what Perplexity has created. So this is what we know as being the large language models. And they are trained, excuse me, well, they're like super intelligent kind of autocomplete tools on steroids. They've kind of clearly gone to the next level because they're now trained on trillions of tokens and data bits and so forth. And this is possibly it's possibly the most exciting time to kind of experiment and engage with these tools, only because at some point people are going to start getting very, very uppity about things like copyright legislation and things of that nature. In fact, I think Perplexity is currently being sued by Reddit, if I'm not mistaken, most recently, based on the fact that they're using Reddit's data without permission, and there's going to be a bunch of battles like that. So at some point, potentially training data may start to shrink, but right now it's just on fire, and it's quite exciting. So at their core, like large language models are kind of prediction engines. They basically kind of put tokens together, and they based on the prompts that they're reading from you and what it is you're looking for, especially if you design a prompt well, it will basically help you really kind of put together the most logical, connected chain of thought reasoning, if you will. And this is all kind of reasonably new stuff. This notion of chain of thought and logic being added to the predictive capabilities of large language models, and is now allowing these tools to help us do things like computer programming, like kind of like going really deep into some like powerful research. There's a lot of deep research functions now kind of being made available to people that literally will kind of put together 22-page, kind of deep research things and pull up as many as 50 different references, again, which you need to check to make sure that they're right. But this is kind of what large language models are, and this is kind of what the interface is that we're used to. So this is a really super important point about all this stuff, right? This stuff does feel a bit like magic. There's no doubt about that. And it's very easy, especially given the very conversational user interface on the natural language processing front. Um, it makes it feel human. And in truth, we don't need to be fooled by that. It's really important that we don't, in fact, especially in a function as critical as HR, as an example. And this is true for legal, probably true for really kind of any internal function. We always ever need to kind of maintain a critical eye. So it's going to be important that we use our critical judgment and that we are skeptical about some of the outputs, or if not all the outputs that these things have, and make sure that we are testing this stuff for reliability. Our judgment, our sense of ethics, our strategic direction, are really kind of what makes these models excel. There may be a day one day, I don't know when that will be, when these things, kind of take over and kind of make sense of this stuff all on their own. I don't know, but we're far from it right now, I can assure you. Um, there's a great article at the bottom of this slide. When you click on it, links back to a LinkedIn contribution from a good friend of mine, Anna Ott, who's a very clever lady at a venture fund. And she points out a recent study. It was really fascinating couple of professors did in trying to generate data around job losses and the anticipation of job losses relative to AI. And what they found was fascinating in that the way in which the large language models, they use several, process the information, it skewed the information in a very biased manner internally. And they were able to kind of pinpoint, where some of those elements are and so forth. So these things are not perfect, is all I'm saying. Again, what sits between your ears is possibly one of the best supercomputers ever created. And in truth, all we're doing with AI is really, frankly, trying to create, a supersized version of what we already are. And, I know that these things can be as smart as PhD students in certain aspects, in certain ways. But when you look at the totality, the holistic totality of the technology, it still has a ways to go. Okay. So let's start talking about the applicability of AI relative to the HR challenge. Okay. The cool thing about HR is that we're sat on a gold mine, possibly multiple gold mines of data, okay, around one of the most opaque, challenging, and unpredictable, yet most expensive assets in any organization, which is the human being. Okay. We've got loads of interesting data sets on these folks, but what we don't necessarily know is what they are like being able to look at them in sort of a three-dimensional, almost like a hologram, thinking very much like that scene from Star Wars. I'm really aging myself now. The original Star Wars movie, where Princess Leia kind of appears from R2D2's like screen into this holographic image. Wouldn't it be amazing to have that kind of imagery and insight into each and every person in our organization, such that we can like figure out how it is to help them kind of optimize their own potential and at the same time kind of help them be as productive and contributory as we possibly can make them. And that's really, I think, where AI can kind of come in and help a lot with that. So we're in a data-rich environment. We handle loads of complicated things like contracts and policies and engagement surveys, job descriptions, performance reviews, feedback forms, and all sorts, right? But unlike finance or sales, our data isn't always numerical. Okay, it's very text heavy, it's very human centric, it's very context dependent. And so, which is exactly kind of like what AI accelerates in helping with, which is super awesome. What is sticking with the superhero, super worker kind of mentality? What is our kryptonite? Our kryptonite is silos, right? And that's a problem for every organization, especially in the age of AI. Okay. And every function within every organization, but especially in HR. Our HRIS holds employee records. ATS holds recruitment data. L&D platforms manage, training logs, course completions. We've got performance tools that capture things like goals and reviews and one-on-one notes and such. We've got payroll, we've got benefits, we've got all this stuff. And very seldom does it actually talk to each other, even with API keys. API keys being application programming interface tools. It's like a translation language that helps or one tool speak to another tool, even though they might be programmed in totally different ways. You often get very limited, crossover in terms of information around that. Okay. So in a way, it's kind of like trying to build a puzzle with with like all the pieces hidden in different rooms. It's a freaking nightmare. And it's frustrating because we know we can get some really data-rich, interesting stuff out of it if we could do. So AI kind of changes that game, right? Becoming much more of sort of an integrator and an analyst in the same way. And it doesn't just pull data together, it recognizes the patterns. It starts connecting dots that might, kind of take us days, weeks, who knows. And basically, it starts to surface insights that drive much better decision making around that stuff. But this is super critical too. That means then, especially in the age of AI, data hygiene is everything. Okay. So gone are the days when we can accept from someone that they've only completed half of their sign up information in self-service in the HR tool, or that we have somehow input the wrong information and kind of confused names and information and everything else. AI basically will serve as an amplifier for all of that, right? And will get things so much more confused at such great speeds than ever before. And so it's really critical that we basically embrace data hygiene as like table stakes for everything we're going to do. But I'm sure you probably already know that. The real power, I think, of AI and HR is that it helps us shift from being kind of like reactive firefighters that are constantly kind of responding to things that are happening that we didn't anticipate to becoming much more proactive strategists, right? It starts to help us predict things like flight risk and identify, top performers as well as frankly bottom performers, personalized developmental paths, help measure cultural shifts before they actually start to take root, and all sorts of different things. So instead of chasing problems, we get our data together, and that data is good quality data, and it's connected, right? We can start to see around corners. We can start to basically scenario shift. We can start to anticipate things are starting to happen. So we go from hindsight, hopefully, to foresight is the idea. So if we take a kind of reflect on the HR functions today, which we already talked about, scattered systems, disjointed data, kind of endless time spent kind of like reconciling reports. I can't tell you how much time I've ever spent on that. It's ridiculous. We need to kind of now move to a new space. And I call that the connected HR brain, right? So we're going to imagine sort of like a central repository. Creating a data lake is the notion. One of the participants here today, Carmen, is a former CEO of a company called Big Data Systems, I think it was the name of it. And they basically kind of were there very early days. And I was introduced to some of these concepts like data lakes, and I was like, wow, what's that all about? And it is basically this notion of taking all of the data and somehow normalizing it such that it can all kind of live harmoniously in a lake effect. And then basically what you need then is a brain to come along and take a look at that information. And then through a process of querying through prompt engineering, which we'll talk about in a minute, being able to kind of say, well, this is what I'm looking for. Can you do me a favor and go find all this data and bring it back? And I need you to make sense of it in this way. That is nirvana to me, only because it just gives us such more powerful insight and helps basically us get to much richer levels of decision making about the direction of the company, not so much HR. I'm talking about like if we know these things about our people, we can start making these bets. We can start going into new product areas. When we sunset product areas and we have to go through a bit of restructuring of all the people who are associated with that, how do we identify the best possible people to then basically keep and retool and reposition? All of these kinds of things. These are things that HR should be driving, and it's been frustrating that we haven't. So that's what we need to do is create this connected environment. The cool thing about basically giving people the tools at an individual level is making sure that we always ever are offering benefits and capability, not just to the HR team. So I'm not talking about AI strictly in the realm of HR only. I'm talking more about AI to be ubiquitously available to every layer in the organization. So employees, the line management, people managers, the HR team, and leadership basically should all be getting value out of this. And the way they start to get value, especially, is when we start applying the principles of AI to individuals, and we then kind of look at that in a more consolidated and aggregate way, we start to get some really fascinating insights in terms of who this organization is. What skills does it have? Where are those skills from a skills inventory and density perspective? How can we then kind of become a much more agile, cross-functional, and de-siloed organization so we can compete in a very, very powerful new age, the age of AI? How can we prepare for that moment, that future of work moment? And that's basically the work that AI can help us, kind of think through, as well as incorporating new ideas like skills-based organizational models and things of that nature. So let's just, from a metadata perspective, this is the stuff that basically helps you make decisions about the direction of your organization. And this stuff has been missing, for the human beings in our organization for a very long time. It's very few organizations on the planet, like a Unilever possibly, I don't know, maybe an IBM before they fired the 800 HR people and tried to replace it with a bot. It's not a well-known capability, but it is very much a possibility nowadays. So, getting raw data from HR systems containing like loads of really powerful and contextual information. AI can transform that data, kind of tagging things like tagging skills and identifying relationships between roles and detecting patterns in career progression and connecting, kind of disparate information points in ways that we could never do before. And so that's what's exciting about this moment for HR. Metadata basically is going to be the king. And an intelligent use of metadata is really going to help us steer commercial decision making. And it's going to put our HR teams in a position of being super value added as strategic advisors and not simply kind of back office, functionaries. And that's going to be super important. Right. So now let's talk about one of the most important but often overlooked elements and skills within AI, and it's called prompt engineering, which typically in sort of tech parlance, oh, I kind of laugh to myself because I think tech people love to kind of make things sound super complicated where they don't necessarily need to be. It's not engineering, okay? It's just simply putting information together using natural language and just typing it in and basically informing or querying a computer to go away and do some thinking for you, to do some finding for you, and bring that information back and put it in a particular format for you, is the idea. So, prompt engineering sounds fancy and difficult. It is arguably the best, most coolest thing ever. It is so much fun to play with. I'm going to give you a very simple, there's a load of frameworks out there, by the way, and there is shed loads of training out there in terms of how to do the best prompt work. And there's some really cool tools like Good Prompt, GUD Prompt. Very interesting tool. I have that kind of registered at the end, where there's just libraries and libraries of these things based on various categories of usage that kind of really help you a lot. But a very simple structure for this is what I call the care structure. C is for context, right? So imagine walking into a room and you scream at the top of your lungs, fix this, without telling anybody what's wrong. That's what a lot of people do with the natural, the NLP interfaces on these large language models. They just like, go, I don't know, help me cure the cause of cancer. And the machine's like, wow, okay, where do I even start? Right? And it's going to give you a pretty rubbish response. If you basically give it context, if you say, hold on a second, like here's the background of what it is I'm trying to solve for, and here's who I need you to be, AI, in this particular instance to go really help me solve for this. That's the context setting. It's really critical that you put that in there. And it may sound silly that you have to give AI a role in every one of your prompts, but it really actually helps laser focus the actual computer's capability on becoming expert. And so it gathers in advance of your launching the prompt, it immediately gathers all the relevant information in that particular space. And there you have a much richer target environment for the AI to then kind of pluck information from. So that may sound silly, but it actually really works a treat. Giving it background and giving it a brief is really essential because it basically then says, right, okay, now I know why it is you need this stuff. I'll now know to look here and not there because that won't be relevant. That's cool. A is for ask. Be specific. Okay. If the context is the stage, then the ask, if you will, is the script as a metaphor, right? So break it down. So exactly what do you want? And what tone do you want me to communicate it back to? You want to be, want it to be professional or casual or empathic or what? Um, do you want the output to be in bullet points, or do you want it to be in a table, or do you want it just to be a narrative paragraph, whatever it is? Tell it, and it will present it properly to you. In fact, it may improve upon what you asked for. Okay, so the clearer and more structured you ask the AI, the better the output is going to be. R is for refine. Okay, you won't always ever get what you're looking for the first time, and that is brilliant, believe it or not. It might be a bit frustrating. Sorry, sip of water. It might be a bit frustrating that you can't get the speed you want in terms of getting an immediate right, perfect answer, but that is very seldom the output. In fact, it's actually better, especially the more complex your ask. It's actually better that you actually get an iterative response back because then you can say, "Oh, you're close, but you're not quite there yet. Instead of this, can you do this and this and this and this?" By the way, it's really helpful to be positive as opposed to being focused on the negatives. So if you tell an AI, "Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this," it gets a little bit befuddled and confused. And it's like, okay, so what do you want me to do? Whereas our beautiful minds, of course, are thinking, okay, so I'll not do those things. Um, but I can definitely do all the other things. So when you tell it, just be positive with it. So you were really close on this, but here's what I need you to do instead. And just kind of shift their focus and direction. And it gets better so fast. It's shocking. E is for evaluate. And this is again, this goes back to using your judgment, your sense of ethics, and your critical mind. Always ever evaluate the information. AI is not magic, it is logic. Okay. And you are always ever still the editor in chief. So don't forget that. Always double check. There's so many issues, problems with people. You hear this all the time in terms of college kids using AI to write essays and try to pass it off basically as their own work. And it's just, it's easy to kind of figure out the fact that certain sentence structures are what they are and everything else. There's lots of patterns emerging around that. But it doesn't necessarily, it's not a magic bullet. It's much better if you think it through. Number one, you can also learn so much about these various topics as you're kind of going through these searches. So embrace prompt engineering and learn as much as you can about it. Super important. Okay. So now we're going to start getting into the use of AI in terms of the actual workflows in HR and so forth and how this actually works. Okay, so most of us are still spending, hours a week on repetitive cognitive tasks for writing policies and drafting communications and tweaking job specs and all sorts of things. But if we could compress all the time we spend on stuff like that into a matter of minutes without sacrificing quality, that would be amazing, right? So these LLM models are now transforming that space. And they're not just novelty tools, right? They're becoming really kind of essential co-authors, co-editors, co-thinkers. They help me, for instance, when I am kind of cognitively tired and feeling a bit down and a bit weak, and I'm just very non-creative in those moments, and my mind tends to wander. What a perfect time and an option basically to kind of start to engage with an LLM. It just immediately kind of brightens my thinking. It just sparks all sorts of wonderful, curious things going on in my head and starts to get my engines going again. So it won't give you necessarily the perfect answer, but it sure as heck will get you moving very quickly in the right direction. So you take job descriptions for an example, right? If you need to ensure consistency and compliance and inclusivity and speed. If you give an LLM, the key details and just tell it, present it in the structure, make sure you have these categories covered, and give it a couple of examples. You basically can rewrite the entirety of your job description library in a matter of hours. It's really quite fascinating. And it also helps, I always ever find too, and I consider myself a pretty decent writer, I guess. It really kind of helps with communications, right? Whether it's like a delicate kind of restructuring announcement or an uplifting onboarding email or whatever it is. Like these large language models are brilliant at generating not just great content, but the right tone, especially again, if you give it good context, right? The right level of detail. And you can also kind of instantly then translate it to, who knows, 120 different languages, which is super helpful. So that's the kind of thing that it can help us do, which is awesome. Um, so we've seen how large language models can supercharge us, which is kind of cool. But what happens when we start to connect the power of conversational experiences across the organization? So let's get a little bit into chatbots, and just kind of touch on this real quick. And by the way, I think this is arguably probably the first AI use case that makes sense for HR to get into. If you're not doing this already, I would tell you without question, this will be required by next year. Okay. Having said that, you got to work with the right tools, the right companies to really kind of help think through, and it's going to take some thinking. Help think through how do we create the best possible bots, basically to help enable all of our people to get access to all of our information whenever it is they want it. 4 o'clock in the morning in Peru, great. No worries, it's on. But it's the design of it and it's the structured information that goes into it that's really going to be important. And to work with a vendor that can help you get there at speed is powerful. Um, so these kinds of tools, and kind of, if you can imagine, like it lets employees basically do some digging about stuff that's important to them, like um, when do I get paid? Or how many days leave do I have left? I have maternity leave coming up in 3 months. What does that look like if I live in France versus England? Because I'm trying to decide between the two of them where I should live. What kind of benefits can I expect? All these sorts of things literally can be answered by one of these chatbots, if in fact you've obviously loaded in all the critical stuff, which is super useful. And what's cool is it could be made ubiquitously available. In other words, available everywhere across things like Slack and Teams and Gmail and your website and whatever. And it doesn't just stop at FAQs, right? We can train these bots on all the sorts of structured data. So policies, handbooks, HRIS self-service entries. It can really become very much a trusted advisor for each individual because it offers personalized responses. It gets to know the people and the kinds of questions they're asking. And that's really between the AI and the individual, okay, in terms of that. So it gets the more it works with the human being, the more it learns about the human being, the more useful it can be. Okay. You can also use it with things like unstructured data, like meeting notes, or maybe historical inquiries, or past case handling precedent, as an example. Your tool can basically continuously get smarter and smarter about, geez, how did we do this before? Is that the right way to do it, next? And the thing is, you can always ever build a human in the loop. In fact, I would suggest you always ever do that, right? You always give people an out. You always give people the option to, reach out to a real human being just to kind of make sense of answers. What you don't want to do, like they did at Klarna, okay, interesting company that does this sort of like delayed kind of like payout or payback, loan payback stuff. They thought they had it licked with customer service bots and basically decided to turf out all of the humans that were doing that work and just use the bots and thinking, wow, what a massive cost savings this is. And it didn't turn out so good. I don't know exactly what the details were, but I suspect it probably had to do with the programming of it, the complexities of the customers calling back and so forth. It gets hard, right? If you don't kind of build in the brains and the responses behind these tools. So super important. They could be massively helpful. I've used very clever chatbots on multiple HR tech tools, and it's been game changing. And they're super fast, they're super smart, and they almost always ever get it right. But they do take design, okay? And it's important that we kind of engage with that. So um, we can definitely talk more about those details, but let's kind of move on now to sort of the next level of intelligence around this stuff. And this kind of like goes beyond large language models because now we're talking not about chatbots, which basically are tools of information, if you will. We're talking about agents, and they don't just answer questions; they actually take action, right, as you program them. And so, where a traditional chatbot might tell somebody how to book leave, an AI agent can actually book it for them, right? It'll log into your HR system, submit the request, notify the manager, get the approval, send the confirmation back to the employee, all in a matter of a minute or two. That's how quickly it can all happen. And you can apply that really to anything, within any of your HR systems, your recruitment and learning and HR systems and so forth through API connectors. Um, so it's not that it just, kind of, it means it can basically interact with your entire tech stack. And if you also want to include access to certain, finance tools as an example. So think about like business expense or getting approvals for travel if basically finance has taken over that job and it's not sat with HR. The idea is you got to de-silo your organization and make those connections so that the experience of the employee is seamless and it flows and it allows them to focus on things that are really important, not administrative things over and over again. And importantly, it helps you then create metadata and individual data. And it builds more and more intelligent reporting and analytics off the back of that over the course of time. Okay. So Josh Person again kind of described this shift from the assistance uh, from assistance to autonomy, which I quite liked. He said basically the agentic AI can handle tasks in parallel, creating digital twins capable of managing entire projects on our behalf. And in truth, that's true. You literally could have multiple different, we're going to talk about that in a second, multiple different agents who basically cover off the entirety of the employee life cycle and arguably the life cycles of every function in the company. Okay. You literally, and I've seen some incredible like um, five screen, kind of depictions of these massive, kind of like AI agent kind of farms where you have sort of a master agent who's kind of overseeing all the different agents across every function in the organization. And a whole bunch of stuff is sat underneath that, completely automating all sorts of tasks that people don't have to touch anymore, which is really quite fascinating. But again, these things need programming and they need people to kind of look after them. And importantly, it's going to require us to ensure we are well prepared for the engagement of an agent. And that kicks off an entirely different focus for HR going forward, which is this notion of organizational design, job design, right? Work design. These aren't small things to go fix, but these are things that HR is now going to start to embrace, going to have to embrace in order to kind of bring this agentic life going forward. Okay. So anyway, so we talked about that. So imagine now, work stream, for instance, where a new hire signs a contract and instantly a job offer gets prepared, right? And it sends off, it customizes the offer and sends it off to everybody. Everybody signs off on it. That immediately then kicks off a background checking agent, right? That kind of goes through a verification process and it already knows who this individual is, who they're reporting to and what level they are in the company, and therefore what particular type of background check they need to kind of go for. And it just automates that entire process, gathers all the information from the new hire, communicates with whatever third party is helping them do this stuff, and immediately just kind of keeps track of the information. It reports back on progress and eventually, hopefully, approval. And then once that's all cleared, then the person automatically gets a system access agent working on email accounts and their permissions, and their equipment and their access and everything else. And then there's a welcome agent that then kicks in and says, "Hey, Sarah, really good to have you in the company. So excited about your being here. This is going to be amazing. Everything seems to be going along really smoothly. I would love to present you with your pre-boarding and onboarding activities so we can start to kind of get you as productive as possible, as quickly as possible, and to really make you feel welcome. It's going to be great to have you here." So that orchestration is powered by what I call sort of the magic triangle. So you have something called robotic process automation, and it's not just about robots. Don't panic yet. There are going to be a bunch of them soon enough. Um, but this is about the type of programming it is. So robotic process automation, large language models for content and reasoning, and then you have your APIs, right, for system connectivity. So that magic triangle exists, and then you can pretty much kind of access and manage everything. Um, and so, kind of Burson again kind of talked about the notion that AI agents can really kind of manage entire projects on our behalf. And that's exactly kind of what we're seeing here. This is not just about being more efficient. It's about creating, huge experiences across, that are intelligent, personalized, and scalable. And we're kind of like hopefully then driving the whole kind of experience design in a much more positive way, a much more autonomous way. Okay, we're getting close now. I know I appreciate I've been talking at you for a long old time, but there's a lot to cover. I want to get to a place where we kind of like start to wrap this up. Um, so taking a look at this, we've kind of talked about all these elements about large language models and agents and swarming workflows and blah, 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 blah. Um, what we want to do now is kind of like start talking about this notion of kind of AI powered workflows. Um, AI basically will embed itself into processes. It won't necessarily sit on top. It will start to kind of like become interwoven in terms of how things work and start to become more focused on orchestration and design flows and helping us choose the right AI tools. And we have to then make sure, obviously, that things are ethical, that they're transparent, that we can understand, A, what our intent was in terms of engaging people with this stuff, B, what it's actually doing and what sense is it making of things? And is it suitable enough? Sorry, I think I've just lost my screen. Bear with me 2 seconds. Yeah, I did too. Just bear with me, guys. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Hopefully you guys can see all that now, so that'll be good. But anyway, as the HR function basically gets redesigned, we're going to see new roles emerge in this whole process. HR is going to have to adjust itself because it's not once we actually have up and running an HR, kind of agent basically to kind of take care of the bottom two tiers of the pyramid of it work around administration and compliance stuff and policy enforcement and things of that nature. We're going to start needing to kind of take on roles like enablement, AI enablement leads, and skills architects, and people scientists, and workflow designers, because we're not going to just be doing this for HR. I see a role in basically HR taking on a centralized focus for all AI transformation in the organization. And so that means we need to become not only kind of adept and very, very clued up in our own function and running like clockwork, but we also then need to be able to kind of repeat that process consistently throughout the organization and to work alongside IT and legal and operations to make sure that we create sort of a center of excellence around AI transformation. I think this is kind of the direction things are headed very quickly. This is not a end of next year problem. I think this is going to be a thing that's going to start rearing its head this year and need to get formulated and managed very early in Q1 next year. So this is all going to be coming. Um, and then kind of moving from tactical to admin, I kind of covered this. I feel like I'm kind of like beating a dead horse a little bit, but again, the fact is that we are hopefully going to be freeing ourselves up to do much deeper levels of value. And I think the best possible use case, this is, by the way, a list of all these great agents and tools. I would definitely check out Harriet HR if you're based in the UK. I think you will find those folks extraordinarily well prepared for it. There's another tool called Paul's Job that's based out actually in Munich or Berlin, I can't remember. And they also have kind of a clever approach, different kind of user interface, and a little bit more complicated. But yeah, these are tools, and there's loads of them out there. But I just suggested a couple that I think are probably worth looking into. And then, the idea is that you will then hopefully start to be able to focus on the things that are most useful and the most powerful, that are going to add strategic value, not to HR, but to the organization overall. And you will save all sorts of time, obviously, if you are able to kind of like get these things as automated as possible. Workforce planning in particular, super powerful use case. Very complicated to do, very hard to do. And so it's going to be super important that, for instance, if you develop a skills-based or skills-first organization, you will now know what your relative talent inventory is and what your talent density is, and potentially create much better internal liquidity about assigning people to projects and things of that nature. That will really kind of create a much more agile, flexible approach internally, driven by AI and really kind of, data driven overall. and supportive of the individual, the line managers, and and the HR and leadership too. So that is going to be an area of focus for you that gets better. I talk here a little bit about, again, the skills-based organizational blueprint, because I think this is arguably the best, most powerful use case that HR can engage with from a strategic perspective in terms of helping the organization understand itself and for individuals to understand themselves relative to their roles today, tomorrow, next year, whatever the case. And you can create all sorts of automation at every level of the organization to help people basically do their jobs better and create incredible metadata, as I've mentioned before, going forward. So that is going to be the pathway, kind of, I think, very, very quickly. And we talked about metadata in action for skills-based organizations. So I'll skip that one. You can read that at your own leisure. I'm working with, a lot of people think about, oh, skills-based organizations are a nightmare. It's so difficult to kind of understand what skills exist in every job in our organization. And that's why I'm working with this company called Get a Clue or Clue, because it's a brilliant piece of software that actually helps you do this at speed, to kind of get your whole taxonomy, skills taxonomy and skills ontologies, pieced together, such that you can get like these incredible dashboards that give you all sorts of insights into. Actually, just go back one. All sorts of insights in terms of, what is the lay of the land, and how are we all working together, and what is the relative health of all of this? Importantly, where do we have gaps, and where can we drive forward in the future? And then it kind of creates this ontological relationship, this weighted mathematical relationship between skills to kind of determine how closely adjacent your skill, for instance, in programming in JSON might be transferable to programming in Python. And how long would I estimate it will take you to kind of pick up these new skills because of that adjacency? We might be able to cut training time in half, which would be amazing. So that's kind of the kind of pathway forward for all of this stuff. And tools are popping up left, right, and center. This stuff allows us to kind of again take on much more exciting and much more interesting roles that are going to be much more valuable to the C-suite, to the organization, and to you. And I think that's what's going to be special about this. The other thing that, of course, we need to talk about at some point is in greater depth is this issue of kind of understanding how is it we actually undertake these transformations in a way that's going to be powerful and useful and engaging. And there's a whole process. This is somewhat the older change management stuff, but it's also because of the unprecedented level of technological power here, being that this stuff is intelligence. It's not just a steam engine or a combustion engine or things of that nature. It is really, again, something that is so intricately involved that it's powerful. And just letting my son in the door. Hold on 2 seconds. It is basically central to the way it is we think about our organization. So it's important to kind of think small first, right? Because again, there's a lot of preparatory work to do. There's a lot of design work to do to engage, and basically work in a very cross-functional way and use tools that are around things like problem solving, but also around design and planning. And again, I've got a lot of help for that if you'd like to kind of engage with me on that. But look, this is sort of a quick summary that kind of like ties everything up. There's a lot to consider. I apologize that it's hard to jam this into an hour. But even more powerfully, I've shared with you here a huge list of incredible resources. All of these underlined elements basically are URL links. And I would absolutely encourage you to go to, especially like the AI Open Academy and Perplexity AI Academy and Grow Google and a couple of others. Spend some time kind of learning how this AI stuff is working and so forth. But do reach out to some of these other folks, and in particular, reach out to me again. I've got a lot of love for this process, and I appreciate that it is disruptive and it is wild and it is changing constantly. And even I still feel like a novice in this space, even though I just learned how to program AI agents fascinating stuff, but it is changing at speed every day. So I am offering a 5 week kind of intensive coaching session, one-on-one, or if you wanted to bring in a couple of other folks, we could do that too. That basically covers off sort of the entire range of things that we talked about today. I'm also going to continue this series and going to give you little teasers and tasters of the things I would cover in the various aspects of my 5 week acceleration program with you. All you need to do is just, click on the link and fill in the type form, and we will be ready to go. I appreciate we are at time, which is why I hustled things up at the end. Um, and if anybody has any questions, Zoe, do you want to pop in here and kind of like read anything that anybody's put in chat?
Hi, Jeff. Hi, everybody. So we have one question from Matt, and he asks, you mentioned there are a lot of tools, which there are. How do you
Loads.
evaluate the tools that are good versus the scam tools?
Wow, big question, right? It really depends on what problem you're solving for, number one. Number two, it also depends on what level of connectivity you need to fill in. Um, it also is an issue, I'm sure, for you as budget, as well as what kind of AI, capacity and capability do you need? What is it you're looking to automate or augment? If you want to go have some fun, on that page that I shared with you that has all of those links, there is a reference to something called stacked.tech, stakkd.tech. It is chocker full of all the new emerging HR tools, many of which are AI powered, some native AI, some wrappers. And there's some really great little descriptors in there too. And you can kind of start that as your research point.
Good stuff. Thank you, Jeff. I don't have any more questions in the main